Hello, everyone. It's great to see you here, and welcome to River Rally's Compton Awards session and panel. My name is Jumana Vasi. I am based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I use she, her pronouns. I am starting my third year as a proud board member of River Network, and I am in my first year as board chair. I'm excited to have this conversation with our two Compton Award winners. This is the 20th anniversary of the Compton Awards, and we have, for the first time, the board has identified two Compton Award winners, and we have Dianne Dillon-Ridgley and Susie Wilkinsburl with us today. Let me read you their bios really quickly before we move into the conversation. So, okay, having trouble finding my slides. Okay, first, Dianne Dillon-Ridgley is a lifelong advocate for human rights, female empowerment, and sustainability. Dianne started as a college intern during the early days of the Environmental Protection Agency and served as a United Nations representative for the YWCA, advocating for education and political access for women in international conferences and in negotiations around the world. Dianne attended the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio by appointment of the White House, the 1997 United Nations General Assembly on the results of Rio, and the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development in South Africa. She's the only person to have attended all three US delegations. Dianne was formerly president of the Association of Iowa Human Rights Agencies, the CEO of the Women's Environment and Development Organization, and has served on many notable boards, including the National Wildlife Federation. But most importantly for us, Dianne served on the River Network Board of Directors from 1999 to 2008 and was the first female and person of color board chair from 2004 to 2007. Next, we honor Susie Wilkinsburl. Susie has devoted more than 40 years of her career to fields of water and land conservation. Susie has worked as staff at both American Rivers and River Network. She served as the executive director of three organizations: Farmington River Watershed Association, Connecticut Land Trust Service Bureau, and Long Island Sound Task Force. For the second half of her career, Susie has been an independent consultant assisting land trusts and river groups throughout the Southeast with organizational development, strategic planning, board development, fundraising, and the like. And for the past 10 years, Susie has been active with the regional nonprofit dementia efforts. Importantly, for this conversation, we have had the pleasure of Susie as board chair of River Network from 2011 and 2014, and served on the board of directors for 9 years, 2006 to 2015. And Susie is currently an emeritus board member of River Network and has been a tireless supporter of our activities. So in the court, those bios are amazing and great, but they don't really capture the passion, the compassion, the tireless efforts. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation where we'll have Dianne and Susie in conversation about the evolution of River Network in the field, about the Jim Compton and his legacy, and about their thoughts and hopes for the future. And so the course of this hour that we have together, I will be posing a few questions to Susie and Dianne, and then we'll take questions from all of you. So please note your questions in the chat. I know we can't see you. It would have been great to be in person, but we're going to do our best, and we're going to get started. And right before I ask my first question and bring on our esteemed guests, I just wanted to tell you what I've learned from the conversation that we had in preparing for this presentation. So I learned that Dianne was close friends with Wangari Maathai, founder of the Green Belt movement and former, she's no longer with us, but she was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize, and she passed away in 2001. Susie's father spent time with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when Dr. King was speaking at Susie's father's church. And Dianne knew Aldo Leopold's much younger brother towards the end of his life. And she noted that she's not that old, that she knew Aldo himself as a young man. But these connections, I think, speak to how broad and deep our two awardees' experiences go, and what they've brought to the field as well as to River Network. So Dianne and Susie, I invite you to sort of unmute yourselves, and I will pose my first question, which is, this is the 20th year anniversary of the Compton Award, which is in recognition of Jim Compton. But I never had an opportunity to meet him. And I understand he was a decorated World War II veteran, a lifelong advocate for peace, and an important voice in the environmental movement. I know that you had some interactions with Jim and also are closer to some of his direct legacy. And I was wondering if you could talk to what you learned from him and from what his legacy has been. Oh, I'm supposed to ask. So Susie, do you mind jumping in? Thank you. I forgot to call you.
That's okay. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Jumana. I appreciate being here today and feel very honored to receive this award. It is just truly an honor. I'm coming to you from the Catawba Nation historic lands near Charlotte, North Carolina this morning. I want to acknowledge some of the earlier winners of the award, and especially Sandra Postel, from whom we will be hearing later today. I also wanted to thank our supporters of River Network historically. They have been so great to stay with us over all these years. I first knew Jim. He was on the board before my time on the board, so I didn't know him in that capacity. I believe Dianne has some memories of him in that regard, but I did know him as an 80-plus-year-old, and he came to St. Louis, where I, at that point, was working with a lot of the conservation and environmental justice groups up and down the Mississippi River. He came to St. Louis, and he wanted to get into the Mississippi River and go kayaking. Well, I am not a kayaker, so I had to sort of scramble and make sure that, one, he could get the equipment, and two, he could get on the river, but not by himself. But he had an indomitable spirit. He really was just a kind of a can-do guy. And I just admired him just in my little meeting with him at that point. So those are my thoughts on Jim Compton. Dianne, how about you?
And don't forget to unmute, Dianne.
It looks like I never did mute myself. I never did mute myself, so that's why I didn't realize it was muted. I guess maybe Carly did that. Anyway, I want to thank everyone as well, and my cohort, Susie. It's a real treat to be acknowledged with you. A couple of details that I think will be a little helpful. Jim was a Marine, and I think there's something about a Marine spirit that kind of stays the same. And his younger brother, but the youngest of the children, actually died in World War II. And that had a lot to do with the family and their legacy and their focus on anti-war and peace. Jim and I actually probably connected as much initially around population issues. Jumana, there are more pieces that you don't know. I actually was the president 4 times of Zero Population Growth, which is now ZPG, which is actually now Population Connection. And it was even more challenging to be a woman of color talking about population issues before we had more advanced and inclusive language. of how we talked about population, not just as numbers, but instead as people. So that's one thing. And Fred Leopold was actually not that much younger than his brother. He just lived a long time. Although Leopold actually did not live to be a very old person. I can't remember how he died, but I don't think he was more than 50 or so in Wisconsin. We were in Burlington, Iowa, and my then husband, just to be accurate, since it's his birthday today, we moved from Boston to Burlington, Iowa, and we lived on the bluffs of the Mississippi River, just a few houses down from the Leopold House, which they're trying to make a National Historic Center and conference place. And it's really a beautiful compound. Some friends of mine who bought one of the two houses actually donated it back to this effort that they're doing in Burlington. But Leopold, Fred, was actually my husband's patient. That's how I got to know him. And he was older, and he taught me how to do wood duck houses, how to build them and put them up. And he liked that I didn't cut my grass right away, because he was always frustrated. He said, if those people would just let the grass grow, don't let it go to seed, but let it grow up tall enough so it can choke out the weeds. Then you wouldn't need to put all that crap on the ground that then runs off into the rivers. So he earned every bit of his crustiness. But so that was the point about Berlin. I now live and have for the last 25 years or so in Iowa City, Iowa. I live about 1.5 miles from the Iowa River. Living on the bluffs of the Mississippi, though, for a little over 10 years as a native Texan. I'm a 5th generation native Texan, but living on the bluffs of the Mississippi on the western side of the river, you're about 80 feet up. It gave me a relationship and an understanding and a connection with the land, because we lived right at the point where Big Island starts, which is the largest island in the Mississippi River. And the island is about 1 mile long. And, day after day, you see the subtlety of the changes. You see the blue herons migrate in the fall, and the birds really do use the river as a highway. I remember one Sunday morning counting 43 bald eagles that were in the trees. And this was in the mid 1980s and I would say that to people, and they said, but there aren't even 43 bald eagles left. But there were. And in the middle of the winter, they were there. And the point I'm trying to make is it gave me an understanding at a most visceral, fundamental level of having an absolute relationship and love affair with a piece of land, a piece of water, a vista, and knowing it, and knowing not so much that it belonged to me. I just paid, some real estate taxes, but I belong to it. And I think part of what we have tried to do over our legacy and our time at River Network is to help everyone understand the relationship that we have with water, with the natural resources, which was always what Wangari would talk about. The last thing I would say about this, though, is when I became chair, I remember a conversation I had with Carl Anthony, who a lot of people will know who that is. And if you don't, you should look him up. He's fabulous. He was very much an early environmental justice. I'm not saying he's not doing it now, he still is, but he was very much an early environmental justice advocate from the Bay Area. But Carl asked me, he said, well, Dianne, what are you going to do with, being the chair at River Network? Because we had always talked since the early 90s about taking on these roles of leadership and responsibility. And I said, well, I really have come to understand that the democracy and the reality of the United States is only possible because we have and have been blessed as a nation with this vast network of river systems and tributaries and access to water that is widely available in dispersed areas. You look at many countries, there's desert, there's shoreline, but from the Agualala Aquifer to all of the different rivers that we have in the United States, that is, and very rarely is it explained to young people in that context, but that's the connection that actually made the democracy possible, because we could have cities from St. Louis that, that Susie mentioned, to Cincinnati, to Denver, to Fargo. I don't need to keep going, but you get the point, and all across the country, because we had vast amounts of available, accessible, clean water. Communities could sprout up all across the land. And we have been sometimes good stewards, all too often not so good. I remember being an undergrad at Howard, and I know Jumana wants me to stop, and I will in a second. But I remember, because at Howard, I was the student coordinator for the very first Earth Day on our campus. And I remember people teasing me, saying, well, Dianne, why are you dealing with all those white issues? Which I found an extremely annoying question. And so I needed a good answer. And I said, actually, I have been known to drink water, and I've even been seen breathing air. Well, of course, you kind of get a little chuckle when you'd say that. And I said, so you understand, these are not white issues. These are our issues. And we've done an okay job. But I mean, I'm sitting on campus then in 1969 and 70, and the Cuyahoga is literally burning on fire. And that was the impetus that got the Congress members off their keisters and really started the Environmental Protection Agency. So there, Jumana, that's about answers to 3 of your questions.
Well, thank you, Dianne. And I actually have enjoyed the chance, and I could listen to you both for hours, but I do have a job to do. So I will ask my next question. And Susie, maybe if you don't mind starting first. From your vantage point, both of you, you've seen and done a lot. How do you think the environmental and conservation movements have evolved over the last 20 years or more from the Compton Awards, and where do you think we need to go?
Well, I'll start. Dianne mentioned in 1969 the Cuyahoga River in Ohio catching on fire. The year before that, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was passed, which precluded rivers from being dammed. And I know that was the historic focus of American rivers. And I know they still work on dam removal and trying to prevent dams from being built in the United States. The first Earth Day, as Dianne mentioned, was 1970. That's 51 years ago. And Dianne and I both remember where we were. So what can I say? Thinking about water and rivers, I just reread a 1986 book, Cadillac Desert by Mark Reisner. And it really is the history of turning the arid West into sort of a lush landscape. And sort of the rape of free-flowing rivers in the West. And even though that book is old, and the statistics, of course, are out of date, it still speaks very much to my heart in terms of what we have done to abuse the natural resources here in this country. As an aside, in the early 70s, I was living in Northwest Ohio and was a gubernatorial appointee to an advisory committee that provided input and direction to a level B study on the Maumee River that was part of the Great Lakes Basin Commission. And I know one person that's on board here today, Todd Ames, who's listening, also knows the Great Lakes Basin Commission and their early work. Today, in the age of the cloud, folks get a kick out of the fact that the data that was gathered by state and federal employees back then was stored on index cards. Now, really, and probably that historic information is sitting there in some basement, some damp basement in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was in my mid-20s, And when in serving on that commission, I had a woman who was in her either late 70s, maybe even early 80s, with whom I roomed when we went to our meetings and stayed and met for a couple of days. Her name was Bea Waterbury from Toledo, Ohio. She was just a citizen, and her health wasn't so great. She had a failing voice. But me as a 20-plus-year-old, being guided by her and her quiet advocacy meant a lot to me as I cut my teeth early on environmental issues. So we've come a long way since then, and River Network, of course, was founded in 1988, and I know we will be talking a little bit specifically about River Network. And but I think the movement has moved from really an elitist focus, as Dianne was mentioning, to one that is more inclusive and includes everybody. As Dianne said, we all breathe the air, we all drink the water, and we all have some relationship with rivers and water.
Yeah. What I would add to that, I tell a lot of stories. If you live in Iowa and you're from Texas and you don't tell stories, you kind of you don't even know how to talk. So everything is a yarn. But I had two grandmothers who were both very different but staunchly activist. I mean, my maternal grandmother finished Tuskegee in 1919, and that was my paternal grandmother, and George Washington Carver was her faculty advisor. My maternal grandmother finished Fisk. In fact, I just finished doing a thing of about 45 different family members who went to various and sundry assortments of the HBCUs over the last 3 generations. And my maternal grandmother was the one who actually started me on my YWCA track. Jumana, just by, I don't want to say clarification, but a fine point on it, I actually represented the World YWCA at the UN, which is headquartered in Geneva and has over 100 different countries that have YWCAs. Domestically, I chaired racial justice a couple of times for the YWCA of the USA, but that's just a detail. Anyway, before we start talking about the people specifically at River Network, people like David Borden and Sally Bethea and Wendy Wilson, or Tim Palmer, who took me out for my first time ever going out on a river, I thought, I don't even need to go again. I mean, I went out with Tim Palmer. You can't do any better than that. And he took me over some really baby rapids on the Potomac. And I was in Wendy's borrowed shoes because I was strictly a stiletto, lady, with suits and whatnots. Time has changed on that. But I had a quote that I've used for about 30 years when someone first asked me. I was on Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development, called the President's Council on Sustainable Development, the PCSD. And I got a question about, where should the environmental movement go? What has been successful? And I said, we have spent the last 30 years absolutely effectively politicizing the environment. And I think that's too bad, because what we should have done was to environmentalize politics. We made the environment another political issue. And what I think particularly, and I love men and I love guys, but I also make a distinction between the patriarchal narrowness that exists sometimes and the benefit that the feminine brings to many discussions and issues. This is one. We need to help the political discussions, we need to help the policy discussions understand discussing the environment not as a cost loss analysis. I'm not saying you ignore that, but when you try and look at the value of a tree, if you only do it once you cut it down and look at the board feet, the dollars, the cost of board feet for lumber, you've missed the intangible and the spiritual part of what that tree means to us as a people. And I think that's what we did with the environment. We politicized it so much instead of helping folks to understand the environmentalizing of politics, the other way around. There you go, Jumana. Did I lose you?
No, I'm sorry. I was checking out the chat, and there's
we've got three different jobs that she's trying to do: to corral us, to read the chat, get everybody's questions, and then think through what she wanted to say on her own. So I think you're doing a fabulous job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I'm so glad to see some former board members of River Network weighing in on the chat, some of our close friends. And I know that, I don't know if everyone can see where the chat's going, but it's fun to read the comments. And thank you. Thank you both for that. And I have another question for you. So why River Network? What brought both of you to give your time, talent, and treasure to this organization, and to make that extra step of stepping into the board chair role? Why River Network? Susie, why don't you start, and then we'll move to Dianne.
Well, just as a little bit of background for those of you who are newer to Raleigh and newer to River Network, our organization was founded in 1988 really to provide care and feeding for local river groups. Phil Walleen in the Southwest was trying to get protection for the Rio Chama River, and he came to American Rivers, and I was on staff at American Rivers at that time, and said, gee, can you help us out here? We want to protect this river, but we need help with the organization to do that. And at that point, American Rivers' focus was not on that. It was that kind of work was not included in their strategic plan at that time. So Phil kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, okay, I'll form my own organization. And he did. And back then, it really was focused on rivers for recreation and for protecting their natural resource values. And thank goodness, since then, we've come a really long way in our journey of commitment to rivers for all peoples, for drinking water, for urban river issues. And I think it's important that River Network, if you look on our website, you will see that our efforts with diversity, equity, and inclusion have been going on for well over 20 years. Former president of River Network, Ken Margolis, started as early as 2001, really seeking input and participation from Native Americans, and our journey has gone on since then to be more inclusive and think about river and water for everybody. I did serve on the board from 2006 to 2015, and as Jumana mentioned, I'm a member emerita at this point. During that time that I was on the board, 06 to 15, we did have some inclusion, diversity on our staff and some of the board, but we were grappling with how to expand beyond that. And one of the things that we were able to do was establish a diversity subcommittee that started to look at ways that the organization could be more inclusive. We did broaden our strategic plan so that we could focus our programmatic efforts to ensure that the organization's work benefited all people. Oh, good, they've got the site up there, or one of the pages from the site, and I encourage you to look at the that sort of quite thorough discussion of where River Network has been and plans to go. We did start with our Urban Waters Learning Network and directing pass-through grants to environmental justice organizations. that we're working on water. So I think that this effort for inclusion has historically been there for quite a long time, and frankly, much longer than a lot of other environmental organizations. And I'm very proud of that. And we should be proud of that. But that work doesn't ever stop, and we need to think about the value of water and rivers for everyone as we go forth.
Well, adding to that, actually, it was Ken Margolis who heard me speak. I was doing a talk at the Delaware. I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was the Delaware something where the three rivers come together. And I was representing, it was the President's Council was administered, so to speak, out of the CEQ, the Council on Environmental Quality. And the 6 years of that process, I did a lot of speaking, both domestically and internationally too, in Greece and Mongolia and several other places. It was very fascinating stuff to do. But this particular one, Ken Margolis, heard me speak, and I don't think I had gotten off the podium before he was right there. And he said, "This is great. I have something that I want to talk to you about," because he was the executive director. I think he had taken over from Phil at that point as the executive director. And he clearly was a man who had a plan. And he realized, and to his credit, he realized very fundamentally that it had to be an organic process. It couldn't just be, we're going to go find us some brown folks and put them on our board, and then they can carry out our agenda, and then we will look better. Unfortunately, a number of groups have sought people to fit into their agenda rather than recognizing that it is a complete agenda. I use the metaphor, if you have a party and you buy the invitations, you set up the menu, you pick the date, you pick the place and all the details, and then you send out your invitations, and then the day comes for your party and you have to sit there and hope that somebody shows up. But you miss the point that it's not their party, it's your party, and you're inviting them to come to your party. I have appreciated, and look, nobody's fooling anybody. This has not all been easy. This has not all been smooth, but I'm going to skip now kind of like a decade. I really want to say something very, very, well, two people. David Borden was chair. I can't remember if he was chair right before me or Jim was chair before that. But David really was committed to this, and we've had key board members who've understood that this really is fundamentally an agenda for all of the organizations systemically. And you can't, quote, just hold back part of your agenda and say, okay, here, we want you to do this little part for us. And too often that's the kind of thing that's happened. But the person I want to talk about right now is Nicole. When Nicole was hired and came on, River Network has had some hard times. And I remember one time when we had several, it's not politically correct, but I haven't ever come up with a better phrase than a come to Jesus meetings. Because most people, at least, even if they don't agree, they understand what you're talking about. And I decided we were about to have some strategic divorces. And since I was just going through a divorce of my own, I understood exactly what that meant. And we were not necessarily guaranteed. Whenever I see Bill Stetson, we still laugh about all those bumps and ups and downs and the collections of groups and caucuses that existed. But I want to give Nicole credit, because when she came on board, I was no longer on the board of the organization and had been gone for a while. But she reached out to me, and I wouldn't quite say I became kind of part of a kitchen cabinet for her. But early on, I really wanted to be supportive and really to encourage her in her efforts, because I think she really was committed to the evolution of River Network to being a fully, broadly national organization for every community. You know, that when we talk about children knowing their watershed address as well as their political address, it was about how do we really make that real? How do we not just helicopter into a community and either throw out some funds to an organization, but really become partners? And I think that's what's made the success of River Network right now. And Nicole, not alone, because she won't take any of this credit, but she really does deserve a tremendous amount of credit. But there's so many other people, and there's something infectious or magnetic, maybe is a better, less, you know, in the time of a pandemic and COVID, there's something very magnetic about River Network. And perhaps it's because the people who belong and work so hard really do it from their heart and love rivers and love water and love this relationship. I know Sandra and Catherine are going to do a keynote shortly, and they are both excellent examples of exactly what I'm talking about. We have seen communities, and when we neglect the heart and soul of these communities, when we let our natural resources be degraded and neglected, we neglect our souls, and we do it at our peril. And I think the secret sauce, the magic of River Network, is that we connect to and nurture our souls, because our souls belong in those rivers and streams and tributaries and source waters. They're our source as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Dianne. Thanks, Susie. I couldn't agree more with everything you've both said, and particularly with Nicole's leadership. She's the reason I'm here on the board and as board chair, and I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity to work with Nicole and the entire River Network team, who are all amazing and so often behind the scenes. And just want to thank you all for that. For being there, for being wonderful. So I have one request, a couple of comments, and then we're going to ask the last question and we'll move on to Q&A. But so if there are chat items, there's a request to make that all so that accessible to everyone. So when if you type in anything into the chat, please say share with all panelists and attendees. And Todd, you had shared a comment about Jim Compton earlier. I wonder if you could reshare that so that everyone can see read your short reflection on Jim Compton. And Susie and Dianne, we've got a couple of questions about gender dynamics and about your vision, what you see the future of the movement should go. I'd like to get to those. So before that, as a current board chair, what are your lessons learned from your leadership positions that I should be taking away and that you'd recommend to others in other leadership positions? Susie, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Dianne.
Thanks, Jumana. And I add my thanks to Nicole for her vision and her efforts over the past several years. We have been on this continent, we've been abusing rivers since Europeans first set foot on this land and have added to its population. Greed and self-centeredness have and continue to cause damage to rivers. And as we face the extremes of climate change, the historically tested resilience of rivers will be stretched beyond their capabilities. For many of us, protecting rivers has been a lifelong battle. For many of you attending Raleigh, whether it's for the first or the 10th time, many of you were born after the first Earth Day in 1970. And know that this fight has been going on for years and will continue. And Dianne and I think I could speak for Dianne on this, that we both welcome you to the battle. Rivers cannot speak for themselves, and so indeed we must speak for them. And many in our communities back home are not in a position to fight for safe and affordable drinking water, and we must fight for them. Use the information and context that you gain here at Raleigh and use the experiences of your elders. Chances are we've been there and have done that. Indeed, you can avoid some of the same pitfalls that we fell into that we have encountered over the years. Like I mentioned earlier, I got an awful lot from my elder, B. Waterbury, when I was back in my 20s. and continue to think of her fondly, even though she's been dead for many, many years. I've, as far as advice, I think that's it. Listen to your elders, engage them. We may seem like old fuddy-duddies, but we have been there. I want to close my remarks with advice from a character out of a children's book. In speaking about a river, Rat says in Kenneth Grahame's Wind in the Willows, "It's my brother and sister to me, and aunts and company and food and drink and naturally washing. It's my world and I don't want any other. What it hasn't got is not worth having, and what it doesn't know is not worth knowing."
I want that to just sit for a minute, just a moment. That's so powerful. Thanks. You know, we sometimes forget how deeply true some of the things that we were taught very early on were, and we carry them. They carry us for the rest of our lives, and we carry them with us. I'm going to mention one other to your question about how to be a chair or how to be a leader. I think I've been the chair of about 6 or 7 different organizations. And I think it's important to not see the organizations as competition. I think that there was much too much American Rivers versus River Network, so much so that people didn't even want to say that out loud. And certainly with the quote, big greens, there is so much work to be done. There is so much that needs to be tended, that there is more than enough for each one of our organizations to do, that we really don't have time for competition, because there's another whole set of people who will just delight and sit there and watch us, you know, go at each other, because that helps their agenda, which is to deny what we're trying to do to begin with. So that's one. I do find personally as a chair, but also because I was also the chair of CL, the Center for International Environmental Law. And I think as a chair, it's really important to spend time calling and talking to and knowing each board member, because each board, I think of the board and the staff and the leadership something as a gem. And, you know, you can get a diamond in the rough, but after it's well cut, it has many facets and those get polished. Well, they take time and they take attention. And I find service leadership is the model that my grandmothers very much gave to me. It's not about, you know, my being in front of the microphone, but it's how do we make a microphone and amplify the voices of the organization? How do we cultivate strength and power from unity? So that's one of the things I'd say. Now, as Susie mentioned, not everybody was even born when it was the first Earth Day, but I had the pleasure of having the former Congresswoman Bella Abzug as literally one of my mentors. And that's how I got to know, you know, Wangari and Vandana Shiva and a whole host of other amazing. In fact, it was through Bella that I actually got to meet Marjorie Stoneham Douglas. She was already 100 at the time. It was November of 1991. Some people don't realize her father was the publisher of the Miami paper. So she had a little bit of access to her own personal microphone, and she knew how to use it. By the time I met her, she lived to 108, if I remember correctly. By the time I met her at the World Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet, and we were 1,500, I always say women and good non-women, who came from 83 countries, and we met in Miami. and she wanted to be there and be among us. She was in a wheelchair and her voice was frail, but her spirit was kick-ass strong even then. So I will speak up to the fact to say there have always been really great, strong women who've been far more interested in what's the work that's got to be done, how do we get it done? And that's not anything negative about men. I'm just saying what's positive about women and women's leadership. So there, okay. And another one of my favorite quotes is from Bella. And Bella used to say, I still believe women will change the nature of power before power changes the nature of women. So just think about that for a minute. But one other person who was also really very important in my life and very dear to me was Ray Anderson. And he had a lot to do with Sally Bethay. He said Sally was the most fierce woman he had ever met. And he had a lot to do with helping Sally when she was the head of the Chattahoochee River. I can't think of the right word for it. The river, Chattahoochee River Keepers. I guess they use keeper in their title. But I remember Ray passed away about 5 weeks before Wangari did. And that was 2011. That was a really hard year for me because they were two of my dearest. They were old enough older to be mentors and friends, but incredibly close people. And Ray founded the and sustainable design. And I know we were getting close on time. I had the good fortune to serve on that board 17 years. And I remember leaving Ray Federation and in Jackson Hole. And I remember getting stuck at the Denver airport. And so having to take the first flight out the next morning. The point is, as the sun was rising and coming over the Tetons, and we were flying from Denver into Jackson Hole in a small plane, the pilot used the snake as the highway to get us there. And I couldn't think of a more nurturing, beautiful, full moment than to see the sun break through over those mountains and follow the snake as we went into Jackson Hole. And I realized that Ray's spirit and his soul had moved from his earthly body to his celestial body. I don't know any other way to say it, in those mountains and in that river. And I think if we continue to use the language and help people have experiences and understand how we are connected to, we are of, and we are for the rivers, the waters, all of the natural resource. We are hardwired to be in nature. And so when we try and make everything so narrow and we'll never get to what we're trying to do, because that isn't the it. We are of the land, we are of the water. And so I think I always try and remember to bring that to my leadership, to my participation. What are we doing on behalf of people? How does this fit in with human rights? All of this is part of the agenda. Our missions may have a piece of what we're doing, but the democratizing of information, the democratizing of power, the care and the nurture of the natural resources, this is our agenda. We may work in different organizations at different times in our lives on different parts of it, but it is a singular large agenda. It is a singular large task. And for me, at least, if you hold that in place, I may be working here this week, 10 or 20 years later over here, but it is a continuum. It is not a box that's separated. And that at least helps fuel the service leadership that I think we bring to this work. And I hope, Jumana, that gives you some sense of how I view that.
It does. And I love hearing not just the words of wisdom, but the stories that you're sharing. Thank you. And thanks. So Diana, you began to touch on the two questions that were also in the chat. And so, Susie, I thought I'd offer you an opportunity to address both, and I'll reread them for you. And then, so take a few minutes, and then we'll ask Dianne to also add further reflections, and that should probably be about our time. Okay, so let me read this question out from one of the attendees. It seems that water-focused organizations today are heavily staffed by women. And if I have my numbers right, I think in the nonprofit field, about 70% of staff of nonprofits identify as women. So I think the water field is probably similar. And it's great to hear from Susie and Dianne as two women who have been in the trenches for decades. Question. When you started out, did men predominate in the movement for water conservation? I'd love to hear about the gender dynamics present in the work in the earlier days. And then the second question, I'm sorry. So I know that's a lot, but I don't want to miss the chance. And then another attendee was asking about your vision for the future and where the movement should go in 20 years. So gender dynamics in the past, vision for the future.
Gender dynamics, yes. When I started out, and I assume when Dianne started out as well, it was heavily dominated by white men. And we have come a long way since then. I think being a person myself who has never been shy and has a loud voice and has always spoken out and spoken my mind, I think that's helped. I can remember being in Hartford, Connecticut in the state capitol, working on some statewide water legislation, and was summarily dismissed by an older member of the state house, and was talking about my skirts and my petticoats. And I thought, if you only knew. And so we have come a long way, and it's so nice to have gender inclusivity, as well as all sorts of other ways that we self-identify being included in the movement that is for everyone. So that's my first comment about where we've come from. Where we're headed, I touched on this a little bit earlier. I think River Network being sort of from the ground up and being inclusive and trying to listen to the concerns and issues that are happening at the grassroots level on the ground is something that at least our organization will continue to strive towards. And I hope other groups will join us in that. And I think most of them are recognizing that. It was the River Rally in Charleston, South Carolina. I don't remember the year, but maybe 10 years ago, in which there was a wonderful panel where former board member Chuck Sams, who's a member of the tribe in out west, I'm sorry, I can't remember his tribe, that's embarrassing, was pointing out that as we hit the decade of the 2040s, that the majority of people in this country will be people of color. So it's important that we embrace everybody's perspective as we go about our daily task of working on river conservation.
Well, I would add, let's see.
Dianne, I'm just going to let you know that I will have to wrap up in about 4 minutes. So I apologize if I have to interrupt you, but I will do that in about 4 minutes.
Okay, so quickly, mostly I never got paid for anything, which makes you get to do a lot of things if you don't take a salary for it. I was fortunate enough that my financial situation was such, mostly my motivation was partially because my children were little, and I wanted to always be able to say no to something if I didn't want to do something at a particular time. And we had the finances so that I could do that. At least before I got divorced, we did. And I still kind of did it afterwards anyway. But the point was just that that did make a real difference in terms of things. But not only was it a gender differentiation, as Susie pointed out, it was clearly a racial differentiation. I will say Maya Angelou was one of my other mentors. Yeah, I've been really lucky. I really have. But she always talked about courage. And so I also viewed the civil rights movement domestically and the gender movement globally as requiring courage to step up and always speak truth to power, or as John Lewis would say, getting in good trouble. Okay, I apologize for anybody that I didn't name along the way, because there have been a lot of people who've been wonderful, who've contributed, but in 90 seconds or in 90 minutes or 60 minutes, not enough time to reach everybody. And I just want to finish with the future. And for me, Erin Dottie Roy, who is someone whose words I have treasured for years, I like what she says about how you leave a pandemic. And, oh gosh, I have a low battery. Okay, well, maybe, good, okay. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, or our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. It's not about finding blame. When you know better, you'll do better. I believe that. I always have. We are going to do better. We've done better. We're going to continue to do better. But this pandemic has been so damaging, 500,000 people killed, dead in the United States alone. We have an opportunity to make the legacy of that loss go forward in a way that is far more inclusive, that is healing. And that's what I hope we do. And that's what I think we should strive for. And thank you, everybody, for putting this together. It's been wonderful to kind of go through my mind and remember all of the things that, you know, we've done over the last 20, 25, 30 years. And thank you so much for the Compton Award to both to Susie and myself. I couldn't be more delighted to see this was my partner in crime.
Well, thank you both, Dianne, Susie. It's been such a pleasure to have had the opportunity of your wisdom and your legacy over the years, and to have this conversation and have so many friends and colleagues join in. Community is really important. I'm so grateful that you're part of my community and that River Network. I hope when we get a chance to meet together in person. I encourage all in the audience, if you aren't already engaged, that this is a great group of people, and I hope that we will see more of all of you, and that I'll have a chance to meet everyone in person soon. Stay tuned. We've got some upcoming important sessions. If you are part of the conference, I hope you'll join us for our next keynote. Have a wonderful day, and take care. Thank you.